Welcome back, casual gardeners. It's cold today. Even in the greenhouse, the temperature is only 46 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm wearing a coat. A lot of folks right now are probably concerned about food prices and food availability. You may be wondering, what are some things I can grow in my garden that will make the best use of my land? And so I decided to make a video about that. Here are 20 high yield crops you can choose to grow in your garden. I'm going to split this into two main categories. We're going to talk about cold hardy crops, and we're going to talk about warm weather crops. Let's start by talking about our cold hardy crops, and we're going to split those into two more categories. We're going to talk about hardy crops and semi-hardy crops. And I want to start with the hardy crops because that's the order in which we plant things. Hardy crops can generally be planted as soon as the ground has thawed and dried enough to be workable. So you don't want to be planting in the mud. That's too soon. So in my climate, we're going to be direct sowing the hardy crops at about mid-March. However, here in my greenhouse, I've already started some hardy crops in February just to give them a head start. Some high yield, hardy, leafy green vegetables include lettuce, spinach, kale, and arugula or rocket. These are all crops, because they're leafy crops, that will benefit from a high nitrogen fertilizer. Generally speaking, loose leaf lettuce is going to be more space efficient than heading lettuce. And I also like loose leaf lettuce because you can do multiple harvests from the same plant. I usually do between 2 and 4 harvests per lettuce plant when I grow leaf lettuce. So that's my personal favorite. You can also squeeze loose leaf lettuce into areas that are shaded by taller crops because it grows better in the shade than the heading lettuce, which allows you to kind of use your lettuce as a green mulch and use it to suppress weeds while also getting that little bit of extra food out of your garden. If you're a square foot gardener, you're going to want to space your loose leaf lettuce at about 4 per square foot. Kale is generally spaced 1 per square foot, but it has an advantage over lettuce. And that advantage isn't flavor. It's that you can harvest kale all year long up through your first frost. So it takes up a lot more space, but you're going to get a lot more leaves per plant. Spinach and arugula are best planted as early as possible. These are crops that will bolt as soon as temperatures are high enough. The plus side of that, though, is that you can plant spinach and arugula in the places that you've laid out for your warm season crops. They're not going to interfere with each other. So that's a great way to do some seasonal rotation through your garden and really make great use of your space. Spinach can be spaced about 9 per square foot, and arugula you're going to want to do about 4 per square foot. Peas are the only cold hardy fruiting vegetable that we grow in our gardens that made my list. And they will be a lot more efficient if you grow them up a trellis than they are if you allow them to sprawl out. You can also get more efficiency out of your peas if you realize that you can eat your pea shoots as well as your peas. So that's kind of a double harvest from the one crop. Peas will linger into June, so they may be a little bit more awkward as part of a seasonal rotation. If you're a square foot gardener, you're going to want to space them about 9 per square foot. I'm not a square foot gardener, so I'll grow them spaced about 1 foot apart along my trellis, and within the 2 rows I'll space them between 1 and 2 inches apart. Radishes and turnips are hardy root crops that can be planted early. Radishes can be planted up to 16 per square foot. Turnips, depending on how big you're going to want to harvest them, are usually between 4 and 9 per square foot if you're a square foot gardener. Radishes are another crop that's harvested early enough that they can be part of your seasonal rotation. You'll get all the radishes out of the ground before it's time for your warm season crops to go in. Green onions and garlic are also really hardy and will tend to be in early. Green onions are planted early in the spring. Garlic is planted in the fall. Both of these are going to benefit from nitrogen fertilizer in the spring. Semi-hardy crops are planted about 2 or 3 weeks after the hardy crops. In my climate, that's about early April. Swiss chard can be spaced 4 per square foot and will yield until the first killing frost in the fall. Cilantro can be planted about 9 per square foot it is an early bolter. So you're going to want to start picking this heavily as soon as it begins to yield. And this is another one that you can just plant out where your warm season crops will go. It doesn't need its own space, and that makes it extra efficient. Carrots and beets are semi-hardy root crops that with practice can yield twice per year, which makes them twice as efficient. Carrots can be spaced about 16 per square foot using the square foot gardening method. Beets are generally spaced between 9 and 16 per square foot. That's going to depend a lot on how big you're going to let them get before you harvest them. Beet leaves are edible. They're an edible green, so that enhances your beet harvest and improves your efficiency. Potatoes are considered semi-hardy and can go in the ground before your last frost date, in my climate, early April. They're typically spaced either 1 per square foot or 4 per square foot using the square foot gardening method. That feels about right for how I do it too. The closer you space them, the smaller your potatoes are going to be. So if you're growing early potatoes, if you want to harvest a bunch of new potatoes and just enjoy the heck out of that sweet, sweet baby potato goodness, of course you're going to space them a lot closer than if you want main crop potatoes, big Idaho russets. You're going to want to afford those some extra space to grow large. So warm season crops are planted either on or even after your last frost date. In fact, most warm season crops aren't going to go into the ground until the ground is warmed up enough, which can be excruciating to wait for. Tender crops can be planted just right on the last frost date. In my climate, that's between Mother's Day and Memorial Day. Only one tender crop really made my list though, and that is pole beans. Since pole beans are grown up a trellis, they're incredibly space efficient. You get a really great yield because they are going to produce all the way up until the killing frost. Another thing I really love about pole beans is that they're an amazing pollinator plant. Those beautiful flowers that will eventually yield tasty, tasty beans attract bees and butterflies and hummingbirds to your garden that can make your other crops yield more efficiently. Very tender crops need to wait until your soil has warmed up before you can plant them. We're going to typically wait until the soil temperature reaches about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is approximately 16 degrees Celsius. I usually try to wait until nighttime temperatures stop dropping below 50 degrees Fahrenheit before I plant out my very tender crops. Here in my climate, that can be pretty rough. That's part of why I have a greenhouse now, because our nights stay very cold for surprisingly long. So most of us that start from seed are going to be starting our very tender crops indoors well before it's harvest time. Basil is the only warm season crop that is a leafy crop that makes my list. You can space basil up to 4 per square foot and it'll do great. Another wonderful thing about basil in terms of productivity is that you must harvest it continuously for it to be happy. This is a plant that the more you pick it, the better it grows. It's hard to get more efficient than that. A family of 4 for regular seasoning purposes just needs like 3 or 4 basil plants. If you're going to be making a bunch of pesto and storing it, then of course grow a bunch more. Depending on how you grow them, tomatoes are going to need a spacing of either 1 per square foot or even up to 1 per 4 square feet. It's really going to depend on your growing habits. I like to grow mine up poles, and that means that they're very compact and still get a lot of great air movement. I do this not because I like the yield, but because I like to try a bunch of different varieties of tomatoes. It doesn't matter because the average tomato plant is going to yield up to 20 pounds of tomatoes per season. They're just a winner no matter how you space them. I will generally start my tomatoes indoors about the same time I would plant my very hardy crops direct sown. So in my climate, about mid-March. When you start your tomatoes is going to really depend on how big they can get where you live before you run out of space for them. So I could start tomatoes in January or February if I had enough light and space in my house, or if I had a heated greenhouse, and they do just fine. Then I would just have them producing that much earlier. Peppers can be spaced up to 1 per square foot, but I have found that they generally need a little bit more space. In a 4-foot by 4-foot plot, I will prefer to have 6 pepper plants, which, you know, that's a lot less than 16, which would be the 1 per square foot. Peppers, I've already started. I started peppers early February this year. Your climate is going to determine which peppers produce best for you. So I can't recommend a particular type of pepper. I know in my climate, I got excellent yield from Sugar Rush peach peppers. I get pretty good Serrano pepper yield. And last year, my jalapenos did way better than expected. Cucumbers can be grown extremely efficiently up a trellis. You can pack them as close together as 6 inches if you're trellising. And that's amazing. When you space them close, you're going to need to feed them. Use a fertilizer that has higher phosphorus and potassium than nitrogen. So what's a good ratio? I don't know. What's on the market? Like maybe like 5, 10, 10? Something like that. Zucchini needs to be spaced about 2 feet apart. It's a big plant and it grows really fast. But each plant can yield up to 10 pounds of zucchini during a season. So it's a winner. It's a really efficient plant for growing food. At peak production, you will want to check your zucchinis daily. And this is because otherwise your zucchinis can get too big and woody just over the course of an extra day. But also, picking smaller zucchinis will increase the productivity of your plant. So if you're growing for efficiency, you're going to want smaller zucchinis. It feels counterintuitive because smaller fruits feel like less, but you're going to get more of those smaller fruits and it will work out in your favor. So those were 20 high yield vegetables that you can grow in your garden to maximize the efficiency of your food production. But I would want to give you one final piece of advice, and that is grow what you eat. It's not going to matter if you're getting bumper crops of lettuce if you don't like salad. If there are vegetables that you like that didn't make my list, definitely grow those because you're going to eat them. And that's what really matters. So if you found this video helpful or at least entertaining, hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel. That stuff really helps me out as a YouTuber. If you want to see me succeed, that's how you do it for free. Thank you again for joining me here in my garden today. And I hope you have a wonderful time on your own.